Conservatives aren't trying to suppress speech. They simply aren't. They want the rules equally enforced, but we're not trying to suppress speech. I mean, the idea that I would say Nancy Pelosi can't say what she says, even though I may disagree with it, or some other liberal politician says things I don't like in terms of policy and they should be banned, or even AOC advocating Congressman Oscayo Cortez uh, advocating for socialism or communism or some other things I don't like. I mean, it wouldn't occur to me, and I'm sure it wouldn't occur to you to say, well, she can't say it. We really do face a constitutional crisis here. I mean, we've got political figures in control of our government that don't care much about the civil liberties of their political opponents. In fact, they are actively encouraging the suppression and the removal of those civil liberties. And we see that most directly with the late impeachment of President Trump. The left media is celebrating this abuse of power by the House of Representatives, the Nancy Pelosi controlled House of Representatives. But the impeachment is is beyond abuse. I've never thought we'd see our country fall so far in terms of its elected leadership's respect or lack of respect for the rule of law in our constitutional system. They impeached President Trump for allegedly incitement of insurrection. He didn't incite anything, let alone insurrection. It was an impeachment move in the House, where the Democrats control the majority of the House, that was done within a week of the alleged wrongdoing. They had no hearings. They provided the president no opportunity to present evidence on his behalf or even a defense on his behalf. So his God-given rights to defend himself in proceedings such as this were rolled over by the left, who were just saw this terrible violence last week as an excuse, as an opportunity, a crisis to take advantage of to score political points against President Trump and any of you who support not only him directly, personally, politically, but who share his views or just views generally on the issues related to the election and other public policy matters. This is about effectively outlawing and criminalizing concerns about the election, because when you look at what is behind this, they're suggesting that voicing legitimate concerns about the election, or even illegitimate concerns about the election, is the equivalent of violence and insurrection and incitement, all of which should be criminalized. That's clear here. It's not about what President Trump said. It's about the movement he represents, the concerns Americans beyond President Trump have about the way the election was conducted, and trying to make it impossible to share those views. They already have allies in big tech, which I'll talk about later. But this was another wild abuse of power. There was no good faith basis to impeach President Trump. The Republicans just treated it as normal, rather than shutting it down, using the powers available to them under the Constitution, certainly in the Senate. So sure enough, they thought they could do it again. Heck, there's a few more days left. Maybe they'll impeach him a third time. I mean, impeachment's supposed to be a serious process. Now it's the equivalent of a resolution, celebrating, fire hydrants or something, the silly stuff that Congress passes. It's just political gamesmanship. And outrageously, or not surprisingly, the corruption and abuse is bipartisan. You had 10 Republicans sign on to this attack on the civil rights of President Trump, attack on the First Amendment. That's what this impeachment's about. And now the plan is to hold it potentially back until it becomes a politically convenient time to move it over to the Senate for a trial. If it's so urgent, why don't they move immediately? No, but it's not urgent. It's politics. And factually, it is so baseless. This is such a big lie. And it's frustrating. I expect the president's political opponents in Congress to say he incited things like this. I mean, they lie about their political opponents. Politicians do that. The left specializes it too often. But then you see the media report as fact he incited anything. Is just shows you the media is completely gone off the rails. Yellow journalism in its purest form. These mobs, the mob that attacked the Capitol, according to law enforcement, if we're to believe the law enforcement, they were planning it ahead of time. Nothing to do with the speech. The initial violent breaches of the Capitol occurred before the president's speech was over by people who were in a position not to hear it. So it wasn't incitement, even practically speaking, in the sense that people who heard the speech went and did X. And of course, when you look at the text of the speech, there's nothing in it that's incitement. As others have pointed out, if there was incitement in the speech, they would be playing it time and time again. So I encourage you, if you have concerns about the rule of law and the attack on our constitutional system and the attack on again, I said this is not about Trump, it's about you. This is about you. They don't want you to speak any more than they want President Trump to speak. They don't want President Trump around organizing, exercising his First Amendment rights, providing leadership for the opposition of President Biden if he's out of office. They don't want him to do that. They don't want him to run again. And there are more than a few Republicans who share those views. And the fact is they're willing to break the Constitution. I don't know how else to describe it. In order to take away his civil rights and make yours harder to exercise. My guess is if you're watching me and you're a conservative, you're fearful of what you can say right now, aren't you? You're thinking, well, can I post this online? Can I even tell my friends or family what I really believe? This is the United States of America, and that should be the last thing in your mind. And I'm not talking about advocating criminal activity. Of course, they all know that because they don't. It's all just gone. They don't want you to say what you believe about public policy issues. Raising concerns about election integrity, it's incitement. That's their view. And by giving this impeachment the time of day in the Senate, they will endorse and ratify that view and make it harder for Americans of all stripes to exercise their First Amendment rights. And Joe Biden, who talks about peaceful transitions and we have to heal, completely AWOL on this, endorsing it through his silence. He didn't stand up to this lawlessness. I mean, and now there's this constitutional issue of whether the president is going to be, can be impeached after he leaves office. Now, if you've watched me before, I've said half jokingly, but more seriously than jokingly, that President Obama can be impeached. Biden could have been impeached. Hillary Clinton could have been impeached, even though they left office, because prior Congresses in the 19th century have done that. And the left's, and that's an open question whether technically that's possible. Former Judge Ludwig wrote an op-ed this week suggesting that it would be unconstitutional, but he did acknowledge Congress has done it before, which makes me think it's maybe not unconstitutional. But my point being, it's going to be a constitutional battle. Because if you're a defense lawyer for the president or for President Trump, or now then former, or soon to be former President Trump, you're going to raise all those defenses you can raise credibly. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, he's been winking and nodding and not doing much to get in the way of the impeachment railroading, I should say. So you got to let your voice be heard. You got to call your senators. You should call your congressman too, because I don't think this is the last attempt to punish President Trump for exercising his First Amendment rights that were perfectly appropriate to exercise, rather than to try to criminalize speech you don't like. I've been doing this for years at Judicial Watch, and the conservatives aren't trying to suppress speech. They simply aren't. They want the rules equally enforced, but we're not trying to suppress speech. I mean, the idea that I would say Nancy Pelosi can't say what she says, even though I may disagree with it, or some other liberal politician says things I don't like in terms of policy and they should be banned, or even AOC advocating Congressman Ocasio-Cortez advocating for socialism or communism or some other things I don't like. I mean, it wouldn't occur to me, and I'm sure it wouldn't occur to you, to say, well, she can't say it. She shouldn't be able to say it. She should go to jail for saying it. But the left wants to put us in jail for speaking our views on matters of public policy, for exercising our core political speech. That's what this impeachment's about. Outlawing the opposition to big government, big socialism, and practically speaking, the Biden administration and the agenda that will be pushed through Congress. So this is a terrible time for our nation. We have leaders that care little for the constitutional civil liberties of its citizens, so we should be very concerned. We've got the inauguration of President-elect Biden coming up next week, in response to the Capitol Hill violence, which by all accounts probably could have been prevented with the appropriate use of security and deployment of forces. Now we have 25,000 troops and police officers here in the United States locking down the Capitol. It's nearly impossible to travel around large swaths of the city. So giving them the benefit of the doubt, or the folks making these decisions, that they are concerned about violence and they're just trying to make sure that we have a safe transfer of power. Because I don't want the violence to occur during the inauguration, just like I don't want to see it again, like we had during President Trump's inauguration. But that, of course, was no big deal for the big media because they, as I said, support his opposition, even if it's violent. I don't support violent opposition. I don't. So I pray that the security works and there's no violence, no injury, no loss of life. And I still hope, though, that if you want to protest, you're able to protest under the law. The mayor of the city wants to shut down all First Amendment-based protests. I mean, that's not the right response. But they don't, as I keep on saying, the organized left and too many of its politicians in power oppose the First Amendment rights of U.S. citizens. There were tens of thousands of people here last week. I don't know how many of them were involved in violence. But their rule is that if you showed up to exercise your First Amendment rights, you should be investigated. Was that the rule for BLM riots? As I said last week, the left opposed the president and the military, which is now intervening in our nation's civil life by making political statements. Unbelievable. I don't know if you caught that, but the chiefs of staff of the Joint Chiefs of Staff were making political statements about civilian law enforcement issues. But when the president tried and considered invoking the insurrection, he had a practical mutiny from the military over it, and from the left, obviously opposing it. If he had invoked the Insurrection Act as he wanted to, we probably could have had better security last week. Because I'm convinced if they had deployed, and they didn't need 25,000 people to keep that crowd at bay. But when you have effective force, you can stop rioting. Rioting often results from poor decision making by political leaders. And the evidence is that there were officials who thought they would not be able to handle the crowds. And if you don't have security, crowds can easily get out of control. And bad guys in that crowd are incentivized to get out of control. And the pushback from the officials appointed by the members of Congress now complaining about incitement was, we don't want that. We don't want that. They made a political decision not to have security. It doesn't justify lawlessness, but we got to expect our public officials take all appropriate steps to defend the rule of law and our nation's capital. I mean, I feel terrible for those members of Congress and the staff up there who were in immediate fear for their personal safety. Immediate fear for their personal safety. Why do I feel terrible? Because me and I went through it at the White House. When we attended an event as a guest of the President of the United States, that big event where he accepted the nomination. And the White House was surrounded by out of control leftists. And we had to go out into that crowd with virtually no security or police support. So I have great sympathy for it. And it shouldn't have happened at the White House. Nothing was done. Nothing. And it shouldn't have happened at the Capitol. It's just this is probably the most obviously public and for historic reasons the most significant violence in our nation's capital. But as I said, they took over the Senate, practically speaking, during the Kavanaugh hearings. The hardcore left. They had the White House under the siege last year, as I've talked about. Nothing was done. In fact, the DC mayor, after those riots that nearly overran the White House and put the president in personal, they were so serious they had the president in a bunker. The DC mayor painted Black Lives Matter on a street near the White House and changed the name of the street and defund the police. So Judicial Watch, we are doing an investigation into what went on at the Capitol. Now, FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, does not apply to Congress, which means the Capitol Police are immune from FOIA as well, since the Capitol Police is an agency of Congress. But FOIA does apply to the Justice Department, to the Pentagon, to the Department of Homeland Security, Secret Service, etc., the DC Police. So we're going to be asking for documents to figure out what went on so that it doesn't happen again. I don't want to see 25 in perpetuity here in our nation's capital. I mean, one of the nice things about DC prior to this riot, it used to be you could get really close to the Capitol and just walk around the building and in and outside without much security interference. That was restricted after 9/11 for obvious reasons. But now will the security perimeter get further outside so you can't easily access our Capitol? I don't know. I hope not. But we do need to increase security here in the United States Capitol. I mean, the city, because the way things are currently being run, and and my guess is there's a lot of fault to go around, is that I'm not confident the city is able to control mass political violence. I'm not. And if that's the case, then that's how you lose a republic. I mean, there were insurrectionists in that crowd in the Capitol. And they almost overran the Capitol. And who knows what could have happened but there were insurrectionists targeting the White House and before as well. So, and the security there I thought was not appropriate. Still probably isn't, in my view. So I look at this from a broader perspective. We need to have security in our nation's capital that is now that can contend with the mob political violence that unfortunately is an increasing feature of American life The left ignored it and encouraged it. I'm not going to ignore it and encourage it. I didn't ignore it when the left is doing it. I'm not going to ignore it when folks calling themselves rightists are doing it, those who say they're defending Trump or promoting Trump. That doesn't give you the right to try to kill a police officer and to kill police officers. They were trying to kill those cops. Yeah, I know there might have been a leftist here and there or leftists in the mix there. Yeah, that's probably true. There's probably a mix of leftists who are encouraging, and at least there's one who's been arrested as being a provocateur. But as I said, there were tens of thousands of Americans here last week, millions who were supporting the objections to the election, and they don't want you to be able to say that anymore. They don't.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.